"Turn around, you lied to me," said the mafia boss, when he saw she was carrying his child. The neon sign above the entrance of the Silver Spoon Diner flickered with a dying hum, casting a sickly blue light over the wet pavement of Steelgrave City. It was 3 a.m, and the rain had been falling since noon, washing the grime of the streets into the gutters but doing nothing to cleanse the city of its rot. Inside, Elena Rivera untied her apron, her fingers stiff and aching. She'd been on her feet for 14 hours. The smell of stale coffee and grease clung to her hair, a scent that no amount of scrubbing seemed to remove. Elena placed the apron on the hook in the back room and grabbed her purse. It felt light, too light. She counted the tips in her head again. $80. It was not enough. It was never enough. Her brother? Julian had borrowed $5,000 from the wrong people, and the interest was compounding faster than she could pour coffee. The loan sharks belonged to the Bianchi crew, a gang that had been tearing up the Lower East Side of Steelgrave for months. They did not care that Julian had lost his job at the docks. They only cared about the envelope of cash Elena was supposed to deliver every Friday. She pushed open the back door. Stepping out into the alleyway, the air was cold, biting through her thin cardigan. She pulled it tighter around herself, keeping her head down as she walked toward the bus stop. 2 shadows detached themselves from the brick wall near the dumpster. Elena stopped. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew them. She had seen them lingering outside the apartment complex last week. They were low-level enforcers for the Bianchis, men who enjoyed the fear they inspired more than the money they collected. "Going somewhere, sweetheart?" the taller one asked. He had a scar running through his eyebrow and a smile that did not reach his eyes. Elena took a step back, her heel scraping against the wet asphalt. "I do not have the money yet." Julian said he needed 2 more days. The second man, shorter but wider, laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. "Julian says a lot of things, but the boss is tired of waiting, and since Julian is hiding, we figured we would come to the source." They moved in closer, blocking her path to the street. Elena pressed her back against the damp brick wall. Panic rose in her throat, sharp and acidic. She looked around for help, but the alley was deserted. The city of Steelgrave turned a blind eye to things like this. "We will take what you have in that purse," the scarred man said, reaching out, "and maybe we take a little extra, just to show you we are serious." Elena slapped his hand away, a spark of defiance flaring in her chest. "Don't touch me." The man's face hardened. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it painfully. "You want to play tough?" Sudden, blinding headlights swept into the alley, freezing the scene in stark white illumination. A low, powerful engine purred to a halt just feet away. The car was a phantom in the darkness, a sleek black sedan that looked like it cost more than the entire city block. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit tailored to perfection, the fabric rejecting the rain. He did not run, and he did not shout. He simply walked around the front of the car with a terrifying, fluid grace. Luca Bellant. Even the Bianchi enforcers knew who he was. The air in the alley shifted instantly. Luca was the head of the Bellant family, the most powerful crime syndicate in Steelgrave. He was not a thug, he was a king, and he ruled with a silence that was louder than any gunshot. "Let her go," Luca said. His voice was low, a smooth baritone that carried effortlessly over the sound of the rain. The scarred man hesitated, his grip on Elena loosening but not breaking. "This is Bianchi's business. Bellant, stay out of it." Luca did not stop walking until he was standing right in front of them. Up close, his eyes were the color of storm clouds, dark and impenetrable. He looked at the hand gripping Elena's wrist, then up at the man's face. "You are touching something that does not belong to you," Luca said, "and you are doing it in my territory." The enforcer snarled, trying to salvage his pride. "She owes us money. She owes you nothing," Luca stated calmly. Before the man could blink, Luca moved. It was a blur of motion, precise and devastating. He grabbed the enforcer's wrist, twisting it with a sickening crunch that echoed off the brick walls. The man screamed and dropped to his knees. The second thug lunged, reaching for a weapon in his jacket, but Luca was already there. He drove a polished shoe into the man's knee, shattering the joint, then delivered a swift, calculated backhand that sent him sprawling into the puddles. It took less than 10 seconds. Luca adjusted his cuffs, looking down at the groaning men with absolute indifference. Tell Bianchi that if his dogs stray this far west again, I will put them down. He turned his back on them, his gaze landing on Elena. She was trembling, pressed against the wall, her eyes wide with shock. She'd seen violence before, but never like this. This was not a brawl, it was an execution of power. Get in the car, Luca said. Elena blinked, rain dripping from her eyelashes. What? He opened the passenger door. You are not safe here. They will come back with more men once they can walk. Get in. Elena hesitated. She knew who he was. Every waitress, cab driver, and cop in Steelgrave knew Luca Bellant. He was dangerous. But looking at the two men writhing on the ground, she realized she had no other choice. She hurried past him and slid into the warmth of the leather seat. The drive was silent. Elena gripped her purse, stealing glances at the man beside her. Luca drove with one hand on the wheel, his profile sharp and unreadable against the passing streetlights. He did not look like a savior. He looked like a statue carved from marble and regretted it. He brought her to the Bellant Tower, a glass needle piercing the skyline. His penthouse was at the very top, a sprawling fortress of modern art, dark wood, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the entire city. It was quiet, painfully so. Sit, Luca said, gesturing to a velvet sofa. Elena sat on the edge of the cushion, feeling small and out of place in her diner uniform. Luca walked to a wet bar and poured a glass of amber liquid. He did not pour one for himself. He brought it to her. Drink. It will stop the shaking. Elena took the glass. Her hands were vibrating so hard the ice clinked against the crystal. Thank you, she whispered. Luca leaned against the heavy oak desk across from her, crossing his arms. How much is the debt? Elena looked up, startled. Excuse me? Your brother. How much does he owe the Bianchis? $5,000, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Luca reached for a phone on his desk. He dialed a number, spoke 3 words in Italian, and hung up. Then he looked back at her. It is taken care of. Elena froze. The glass is halfway to her mouth. What do you mean? I mean, the debt is paid. The Bianchis have their money. They will not bother you or your brother again. Elena stood up, the glass nearly slipping from her fingers. Why? Why would you do that? I cannot pay you back. I make minimum wage plus tips. It will take me years to... I do not want your money. Elena, Luca interrupted. His voice was softer now, lacking the metallic edge it held in the alley. Then what do you want? She took a step back, her instincts screaming that nothing in this world was free. Men like him always wanted something. Luca pushed off the desk and walked toward the window, looking out at the rain-streaked city below. Steelgrave is a cesspool, he said, his back to her. But there are rules. One of them is that we do not prey on women who are working themselves to death just to survive. I did not do it for you. I did it because I am tired of cowards running this city. Elena watched him. For the first time, she saw past the suit and the reputation. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the isolation of his stance. He was the most powerful man in the city, yet he stood alone in a glass tower, staring at the dark. He turned back to her. You can stay here tonight. The guest room is down the hall. It is safer than your apartment. Tomorrow, my driver will take you home. Elena wanted to argue, to assert her independence, but the adrenaline was fading, leaving her exhausted. Thank you. Mr. Bellant, she said. Luca, she nodded slowly. Luca. The next 2 days were a blur. Luca insisted she stay until he was certain the Bianchis had received the message. Elena expected him to be cold, absent, or demanding. Instead, he was a ghost in his own home. He left early and returned late, but he ensured there was food for her and fresh clothes. He treated her with a distant, formal courtesy that was more unnerving than aggression. On the 3rd evening, the rain finally stopped. Elena found herself unable to sleep. She wandered out onto the terrace. The air was crisp and smelled of ozone and wet concrete. Below, the city lights spread out like a galaxy of fallen stars. She thought of Julian, who had called her in tears, thanking her for fixing the debt, unaware that she was essentially a prisoner in a golden cage. The weight of it all, the years of struggle, the fear in the alley, the confusing kindness of a dangerous man, crashed down on her. She gripped the railing and let out a sob she'd been holding back for days. She did not hear the glass door slide open. She only realized she was not alone when she felt a presence beside her. Luca stood there. He had discarded his jacket and tie. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the column of his throat. He did not say anything. He simply stood next to her, offering his silent strength as a bulwark against the wind. "I should go," Elena said, wiping her eyes hastily. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. You are not intruding." Luca said. He turned to face her. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face, softening the harsh lines. "Why are you crying?" Elena laughed, a brittle, watery sound. "Because I am tired, Luca. I am tired of being afraid. I am tired of owing people. And now I owe you, and I don't know how to handle that." "You owe me nothing," he repeated firmly, "but I do." Elena stepped closer to him, her emotions spilling over. "You saved my life. You saved my brother. And you ask for nothing? That isn't how the world works. Not my world." "Maybe your world is wrong," Luca said. He looked down at her, his gaze intense, searching her face. "You are strong. Elena, I saw you in that alley. You were terrified, but you stood your ground. Most men I know would have crumbled." Elena felt a heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the cold air. She looked up at him, seeing the man beneath the myth. He looked weary, lonely. "Who saves you?" "Luca," she whispered. The question seemed to stun him. His eyes widened slightly. "No one," he answered honestly. Elena reached out, her hand trembling as she touched his arm. His muscles bunched beneath the fine cotton of his shirt, rigid as stone, but he did not pull away. "You don't have to be alone," she said. The air between them charged with sudden electricity. It was thick, magnetic. Lucas stared at her mouth, his composure fracturing. He looked like a man starving, standing before a feast he dared not touch. "Elena," he warned, his voice a rough gravel. "You should go inside. I'm not a good man. I don't believe you," she breathed. She rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. It was tentative at first, a question asked in the dark, for a heartbeat. Lucas stood frozen, his hands hovering at his sides. Then, with a low groan that sounded like surrender, he broke. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him. The kiss deepened, becoming desperate and consuming. It tasted of rain and scotch and suppressed longing. Elena gasped, her hands tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer. He swept her up into his arms, carrying her inside without breaking the kiss. The world outside, the violence, the debts, the gangs, ceased to exist. There was only this room, and this man. In the bedroom, the shadows were long and soft. Luca set her down beside the bed, his hands shaking slightly as he cupped her face. He looked at her with a reverence that made her knees weak. "Are you sure?" he asked, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "Once we cross this line, I cannot protect you from myself." Elena nodded, her heart pounding a rhythm against his chest. "I am sure." They moved together with a frantic need that quickly melted into something slow and aching. When his skin touched hers, Elena trembled. It was not from cold or fear, but from the sheer intensity of his touch. He was a man known for violence, yet his hands were impossibly gentle. He traced the curve of her spine, the line of her hip, as if he were memorizing her. Luca watched her face, his dark eyes burning with an emotion she could not name. He kissed the hollow of her throat, his breathing ragged. Every touch felt like a promise, every kiss a confession. For the first time in her life, Elena felt cherished. She wasn't a waitress or a debtor or a sister cleaning up a mess. She was just Elena. They fell onto the bed, limbs tangled, the sheets cool against their heated skin. The night passed in a haze of whispers and soft cries, the city outside forgotten. Luca held her as if she were something fragile that might shatter if he let go. Elena held him back, anchoring him to the earth. When the first gray light of dawn crept through the curtains, Elena woke. The room was silent. Luca was asleep beside her, one arm thrown over his eyes, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. In sleep, he looked younger, the lines of stress smoothed away. Elena lay there for a moment, the memories of the night washing over her. Her skin still hummed from his touch, but as the reality of the daylight settled in, panic began to set in with it. What had she done? He was Luca Bellant, the mafia boss, and she was just a girl from the diner. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was a dangerous collision of two worlds that should never have touched. The intensity of her feelings terrified her. She felt too exposed, too vulnerable. If she stayed, if she let this continue, she would be swallowed whole by his world. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him. She gathered her clothes, dressing quickly in the dim light. Her hands shook as she buttoned her cardigan. She looked at him one last time. He was beautiful and terrifying, and she knew that if she stayed 1 minute longer, she would never be able to leave. Elena turned and walked out of the bedroom, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. She left the penthouse, taking the elevator down to the street, stepping back into the cold morning air of Steelgrave, leaving her heart behind on the 42nd floor. For 3 days. The penthouse on the 42nd floor was a tomb. Luca Bellant stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring at the city he owned, but not seeing it. He was seeing her, the way her hair fanned out on his pillow, the terrified, defiant look in her eyes in the alley, the way she had whispered, "Who saves you? Luca." He had not slept. He had not truly worked. The night she had left, she had taken something from him, not his peace. He had never possessed that, but she had stolen the quiet, cold control that had defined his entire life. Marco, his most trusted capo, entered the study. "Boss, the shipment manifests are here for the docks. We need your—" "Leave them," Luca snapped, not turning. Marco paused. He had known Luca since they were boys stealing bread in the old neighborhood. He had never heard that tone, not this raw, uncontained irritation. "Is there a problem?" Luca finally turned. His eyes were dark, shadowed with exhaustion and something else, a restless, predatory anger. She walked out, just left. Like a thief in the night. Marco knew exactly who she was. The entire household had been walking on eggshells for 72 hours. The guards in the hall flinched when he walked by. She was a civilian. Luca, scared. "What did you expect?" "I expected," Luca stopped, clenching his jaw. He didn't know what he expected. Respect? Gratitude? The one thing he hadn't anticipated was this hollow ache in his chest, this feeling of being dismissed. A waitress with $80 in her pocket had rejected him. Luca Bellant. He picked up a crystal tumbler from his desk and, in a sudden violent motion, hurled it against the far wall. It shattered, the sound echoing the sudden splintering of his composure. The guards outside the door tensed but did not enter. "Find her," Luca commanded, his voice deadly quiet. "I want to know where she is. I don't want her touched. I just want to know." Elena Rivera was not thinking about penthouses or the men who lived in them. She was back at the Silver Spoon, tying the familiar strings of her apron, the smell of frying bacon, a scent she had known for 6 years. Suddenly sent a wave of sickness rolling through her. She clapped a hand over her mouth and ran for the staff bathroom. She was on her knees, her body trembling with dry heaves, when her friend Maria pushed the door open. "Elena? Honey, that's the 3rd time this morning," Maria said, her voice full of concern. She was a stocky woman in her 50s, with a kindness that was rare in Steelgrave. She wet a paper towel and handed it to Elena. "I must have a stomach bug," Elena whispered, wiping her face. The porcelain was cold against her cheek. "A stomach bug," Maria scoffed gently. "You're pale as a ghost. You haven't eaten a real meal in days, and you look like you're about to fall over. When was your last, you know?" Elena's head snapped up. "What?" Maria just raised an eyebrow. "Your period." "Honey, when was it?" Elena's blood ran cold. She tried to think. The diner, the debt, Julian's panic, and then the night with Luca. She counted the weeks. It had been 5, 6, no, it couldn't be. Go to the clinic on 7th, Maria said, pulling her to her feet. I'll cover your shift. Go, now. An hour later, Elena was sitting on a plastic chair in a sterile white room, the crinkle of paper beneath her. The doctor was a young woman with tired eyes who looked at the chart and then at Elena. Well, Miss Rivera, the nausea is not a stomach bug, the doctor said, her voice clinical but not unkind. Your blood test is positive. You're about 6 weeks pregnant. The world dissolved into a high-pitched ringing. 6 weeks. Elena's hand went to her stomach, still flat beneath her thin t-shirt. 6 weeks. The night at the penthouse. The one night of impossible tenderness in a life defined by hardship. And it was Luca's. The doctor was saying something about vitamins, about options, about appointments. Elena just nodded, her mind screaming. She walked out of the clinic in a daze. A baby, his baby, the child of a mafia boss. The initial shock was immediately replaced by a pure, unadulterated terror. She thought of the men in the alley, the crunch of bone, the cold indifference in Luca's eyes. She thought of the whispers she heard at the diner, of the Bellant family, of the violence that was their currency. She would not bring a child into that. She would not let her baby be an heir to a criminal empire, a target, a pawn in a game she didn't even understand. This child wasn't his. It was hers. She would go somewhere, anywhere. She would change her name, get a new job, and raise this baby in the sun, far from the shadows of Steelgrave. She would never tell him. It was the only way to keep her child safe. That same night, Luca Bellant was in his study when Marco entered without knocking. Luca looked up, his face granite. What? It's not about the girl. Boss, Marco said, his voice grim. It's her brother, Julian Rivera. A fishing boat pulled his body out of the harbor an hour ago. The air left Luca's lungs. Bianchi. It wasn't a question. Looks that way, Marco said. He was found in their territory. 2 in the back of the head. Classic. Luca stood. He thought of Elena, weeping on his balcony for the brother who was nothing but trouble. And her? Where is she? Her apartment. Our man says she's been there all night. The police just left. They'll go for her next, Luca said, his mind racing. The Bianchis, they'll see her as a loose end, a witness to their collection tactics, or maybe they just want to send a message. He grabbed his jacket. We're going. Elena was sitting on her worn sofa, numb. The police had been kind, but their words were hollow. We're sorry for your loss. No witnesses. We'll do our best. She knew what that meant in Steelgrave. It meant nothing. Julian was gone. Her protector, her burden, her only family. Gone. She was crying into a framed photograph of them as children when the pounding on her door began. It wasn't a knock, it was a demand. She opened it, and her grief was instantly eclipsed by fear. Luca Bellant filled the doorway, his presence sucking all the air from her small apartment. He was not the gentle lover from the penthouse. This was the king of Steelgrave, his face a mask of cold fury. He stormed past her, his dark eyes sweeping the room, taking in the peeling wallpaper, the single lamp, the picture of her brother in her hands. You're a fool, he snarled. Elena flinched, closing the door. What are you doing here? Your brother is dead, he stated. I know, she whispered, a fresh wave of tears blurring her vision. And you're next. He advanced on her. Did you think you could just go back to your life? That I paid off your debt and the world just reset? This is what happens. Elena, this is the world you live in, the one you ran back to. He was angry, angrier than she had ever seen him. It was more than the situation. It was personal. He was angry that she had left. What are you hiding? He demanded, his voice dropping. He was too close. She could smell the expensive wool of his coat, the faint scent of scotch. It made her stomach turn. I don't know what you're talking about, won't? She lied, backing away until she hit the wall. Don't lie to me, he said, planting a hand on the wall beside her head. I saved your life. I took you in, and you ran. And you've been hiding something ever since. She had to make him go. She had to make him hate her. It was the only way. I'm fine. she said, forcing steel into her voice. "I've moved on. Luca, that night it was a mistake. I want nothing to do with you or your world. Just leave me alone." The words hit him like a physical blow. She saw the flash of hurt in his eyes before the cold mask slammed back down. The betrayal was absolute. "Moved on?" he repeated, his voice laced with ice. He stared at her for a long, suffocating moment. He knew she was lying. He just didn't know why. And that was what was killing him. "Fine," he spat. He pushed off the wall and walked to the door. "But you don't get to choose when you're done with me." He yanked the door open and was gone. The slam echoing in the tiny room. Across the street, he got into the back of his sedan. "She's not to be touched," he told Marco. "But nothing gets near that building. Nothing. You see a Bianchi dog even sniffing the curb. You put it down." For a week. Elena lived in a new kind of prison. She knew they were out there, the black car that was always parked, the men in suits who just happened to be on the corner. She quit her job at the diner, telling Maria she was moving out of state. She was saving the few $100s she had left, planning to buy a bus ticket. She was walking back from the corner store with a bag of saltine crackers and ginger ale when the van screeched to a halt beside her. 2 men jumped out. Their faces were mean, and she recognized the Bianchi insignia tattooed on their necks. She screamed and dropped the bag. Before they could lay a hand on her, the black sedan was there, mounting the curb and pinning the van against a lamppost. Marco and another of Luca's men were out, and the fight was brutal, fast and silent. It wasn't a brawl, it was a dismantling. Within a minute, the 2 Bianchi thugs were unconscious on the sidewalk. Marco grabbed her arm, his fingers like steel. "Get in the car!" "No!" Elena screamed, trying to pull away. "The boss's orders," he said, and half shoved, half lifted her into the back seat. They didn't take her to the penthouse. They took her back to her apartment. Marco pushed her inside. "Don't move," he ordered. "The boss is on his way." He left, and she was alone, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. She was trapped. 10 minutes later, the door opened. It was Luca. He looked like he hadn't slept since the last time she saw him. His suit was immaculate, but his eyes were haunted, burning with a cold, controlled fire. He walked slowly into the room, his gaze raking over her. She was standing by the window, her arms wrapped around her middle. She was wearing a large, worn-out gray sweater, the one she wore when she was cold, the one that felt like a shield. "What happened?" he demanded. "They tried to take me," she whispered, her back to him. "Your men! They stopped them." "I told you not to leave," he said, his voice a low growl. He came to a stop just behind her. She could feel his body heat. "I told you that you were in danger." "I don't want your protection," she cried, turning to face him. "It's not about what you want," he roared. And then he stopped. He looked at her. Really looked at her. The sweater was bulky, meant to hide, but it couldn't. Not from him. His eyes, trained to see every detail, every threat, saw it. The slight, unmistakable roundness of her stomach, the new fullness of her chest. His gaze flickered to her face, pale and nauseous, then back down. He did the math, the nights she left, the weeks that had passed, the sickness, the lies. His face became pale, then dark with a comprehension that was more terrifying than rage. "You've been lying to me," he said, the words barely audible. "I haven't," she insisted, clutching the sweater, turning her head to the side. "Please, Luca, just go." He saw the lie. He saw the terror. He saw the truth. "Turn around," he commanded. The words were soft, like silk being drawn over a blade. "Luca, please," she sobbed, tears welling. "I said, turn around." He put his hand on her shoulder, his grip unyielding, and forced her to face him. His eyes dropped from her face, down the front of her sweater. The light from the single lamp hit her just right, and the gentle swell of her abdomen was undeniable. He looked back up at her face, his own mask of shattered disbelief, profound betrayal, and a white-hot fury. "Turn around, you lied to me," he growled, his voice thick with a pain he had never known. She tried to twist away, but he held her fast, his other hand gripping her chin. "You're carrying my child. The accusation hung in the small, terrible silence. Elena's legs gave out, and she sank to her knees, a choked sob tearing from her throat. "Yes," she wept. "Yes." He stared down at her, the world tilting. A child, his child, and she had hidden it. "Why?" he demanded, hauling her to her feet. "Why would you hide this from me? Were you ever going to tell me? Or were you going to take my son, my heir, and disappear?" "He's not your heir," she screamed, her fear erupting into anger. "He's my baby, and I didn't want this for him. I didn't want him to be like you." The words struck him, hard. "Like me?" "Surrounded by death," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "I saw what you did in that alley. Luca, I just buried my brother because of the world you live in. You think I would ever let my child near that? I was going to leave. I was going to go somewhere safe, somewhere he could be normal, where he wouldn't have blood on his hands." His face hardened, the deep hurt in his eyes being sealed away by layers of ice. "You don't get to make that decision, Elena. Not alone. That is my blood, too. It's my body, my life. And your life is in danger," he finished, his voice a deadly calm. "The Bianchis killed your brother. They tried to take you, and now they will know. You think they won't find out? You've put this child in more danger by running from me than you ever were by my side." He stepped back, his mind made up. The king was back in control. "You're done here. Pack a bag. You're coming with me. And you will not leave my sight again until this baby is born." "No," she whispered, defiant, broken. I won't." He picked her thin coat up from the chair and threw it at her. "It's not a request." The Bellante estate was not the penthouse. The penthouse had been a glass tower, a symbol of power overlooking the city. The estate, nestled 20 miles outside Steelgrave in the rolling, wooded hills, was a fortress. It was a sprawling compound of gray stone, surrounded by a 12-foot wall and guarded gates. The windows were reinforced, the doors were solid oak, and the silence was heavy and absolute. Luca had not asked her again. He had simply taken her arm, led her from her apartment, and placed her in the back of an armored sedan. The journey was silent, a thick, vibrating tension filling the small space. Elena stared out the window, her hand resting on her stomach, her face a pale mask of defiance and despair. Her trust in him was gone, shattered by his cold assertion of ownership, and his trust in her was a ruin, demolished by her secret. She was given a suite of rooms in the West Wing. They were beautiful, decorated in soft creams and blues, with a private balcony overlooking a manicured, walled-in garden. It was a cage, and she knew it. A full-time housekeeper, a stern woman named Sophia, was assigned to her, bringing her meals, vitamins, and a quiet, watchful presence. Elena felt like a broodmare, a prized possession to be guarded until it was delivered. She resisted in the only ways she could. She refused to speak to Luca unless spoken to. When he was in a room, she would leave. She ate her meals alone in her suite, though the food was exquisite. Luca watched this passive rebellion with a simmering, controlled rage. He had a war to fight, the Bianchis, emboldened by their successful hit on her brother and their attempt on her, were pushing at his territory. He had an organization to run, men who were beginning to whisper about his distraction, and he had a pregnant, hostile woman in his house who looked at him like he was the monster she always believed him to be. The magnetic pull, however, was undeniable. It was a low, humming current beneath the Cold War. Sometimes he would find her in the library, her nose in a book, and he would stop, his hand on the doorframe, just to watch the way the afternoon light caught the curve of her cheek. She would sense him, her body tensing, and the invisible wall would slam back into place. The first crack in that wall came 3 weeks after her arrival. A private OB-GYN, a discreet doctor with a clientele that did not ask questions, was brought to the estate. "I'm going with you," Luca stated. It was not a request. Elena sat on the examination table, the paper crinkling beneath her. She was 13 weeks along, and the sickness was fading, replaced by a deep, bone-grinding fatigue. Luca stood in the corner, his arms crossed, looking profoundly out of place. He was a creature of shadows and steel. This room was bright, sterile, and smelled of antiseptic. "All right, Elena," the doctor said kindly, rolling the ultrasound machine over. "Let's take a look." The room filled with a static rush, and then a sound. A rapid, rhythmic thump, 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 thump. Elena's breath hitched. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming, fierce love. Luca uncrossed his arms. He took a step closer, his gaze locked on the small, gray and black screen. "There," the doctor said, pointing. 160 beats per minute. Perfect. And there's the head. And see that? A little hand. Luca did not breathe. He stared at the flickering image, at the tiny, vibrant life that was, impossibly, his. He saw the flutter of movement and heard the insistent, powerful heartbeat. It was the sound of a future he had never believed he could have. His throat tightened. He reached out one hand, his fingers hovering over the screen, before clenching it into a fist at his side. He looked at Elena. Her face was streaked with tears as she stared at the monitor, her expression one of pure, unguarded wonder. At that moment, she was not his prisoner. He was not her captor. They were just two people, terrified and awestruck, witnessing a miracle. After the doctor left, they sat in silence. The tension had shifted. It was no longer brittle. It was charged, raw, and confused. That night, Luca did not go to his study. He did not go to the war room in the basement. He went to the library, and Elena found him there hours later, asleep in a leather armchair. His head was tipped back. The harsh lines of his face softened in sleep. On the table next to him was a stack of books, not ledgers, not maps of the city. One was titled Pregnancy, a week-by-week guide. Another was the first year. Elena stood in the doorway, her heart aching. He was trying. In his own cold, controlling, broken way, he was trying. She saw him not as the boss, but as a man just as lost as she was. He began to change. He still ruled his world with an iron hand during the day, but at night, his focus was entirely on the estate. He had the chef prepare the ginger and lemon tea Elena had started craving. He had softer pillows brought to her room. He had the locks on her balcony doors reinforced, but he also had the garden paths repaved so they were smoother and safer for her to walk on. And he watched her, from a distance. When she fell asleep reading in the library, she would wake up to find a cashmere blanket draped over her, though he was nowhere to be seen. One evening, Elena walked into the suite that was supposed to be the nursery. Luca had his architects in, and the room was filled with swatches and paint chips. It was opulent, designed for a prince. There was a hand-carved wooden crib, a mural of a serene forest being painted on the wall, and shelves already filled with expensive, stuffed animals. She looked at a plush bear, softer than anything she had ever touched. Her facade of cold composure finally shattered. This was a lie. This beautiful room was a lie. She sank to the floor, her hands on her growing belly, and she began to sob. Not quiet tears, but the racking, gasping sobs of a soul breaking apart. Luca found her there minutes later. His first instinct was to command, "Elena, stop this. You will stress the baby." "Don't you say that," she screamed, her voice hoarse. She looked up at him, her face a mask of agony. "Don't you dare talk about the baby. This room is all a lie." "It is a nursery," he said stiffly, confused by her reaction. "It's a cell," she cried, struggling to her feet. "It's a beautiful, velvet-lined cell. You think this paint will keep him safe? You think this expensive bear will protect him when the Bianchis come to the door?" She grabbed the bear and threw it at him. It hit his chest with a soft thud. "My child will never be safe," she wept, pounding her fists on his chest. He stood rigid, letting her strike him. "He will have guards instead of friends. He will learn to check under a car for a bomb. He will grow up to be like me," Luca finished for her, his voice dead. "Yes," she sobbed, collapsing against him. "And I hate it. I hate you for it." He did not move for a long time. He simply stood there, his arms at his sides, as she cried herself out, her hands clutching the front of his shirt. Finally, his arms came up. He did not pull her close in passion. He merely held her, as one might hold a broken thing. "Sit," he said, his voice rough. He led her to a small bench by the window. He sat, but not too close. "You think I don't know that?" he whispered, staring at the half-painted forest on the wall. "You think I wanted this?" Elena sniffed, wiping her nose. "You are this. This world is you." "I was 8 years old," Lucas said, his voice so quiet she had to strain to hear it. 8. My father was a hard man. He brought me to a warehouse. He was meeting a man who had disrespected him. He wanted me to watch. He paused, and Elena saw his hands clench. "He gave me the gun," Luca continued. "He put it in my hand and stood behind me, and he told me it was the only way to be strong, that the world was built on fear, and to survive. I had to be the one holding the blade." Elena stopped crying. She was listening. "I grew up in this," he said, his gaze distant, haunted. "I learned that love was a weakness, that caring was a liability. Every person I ever got close to was either a target or a traitor, so I stopped. I built this tower. I built this estate. I built walls of stone and ice so no one could ever touch me." He turned his head and looked at her. His dark eyes were stripped bare, all pretense gone. There was no boss. There was only a man, marked by a trauma he never asked for. "And then you," he whispered. "You walked onto my terrace and you looked at me like I was a man, not a monster, and I broke my own rules." He looked down at her stomach. "I never wanted to break the cycle. I never knew there was a cycle to break. I just wanted to survive. But this child, I don't want him to be. Elena, I don't know how to stop it, but I don't want to." The confession hung in the air, raw and bleeding. Elena saw the truth of it. He was just as trapped as she was, only his cage was made of his own past. She reached out and laid her hand on his. His skin was cold. "You're not him. Luca, you're not your father." He turned his hand over and laced his fingers with hers, his grip tight, desperate. "How do you know?" "Because you're scared," she whispered. "He never was." He looked at her, and the chasm between them, the lies, the hurt, the betrayal, was suddenly filled. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not the fiery, consuming kiss of their first night. It was a kiss of raw, shared pain. It was a desperate plea. It was a promise. It was salty with her tears and rough with his regret. When he pulled back, their foreheads rested together. "I don't know how to do this," he breathed. "Me neither," she admitted. "But we are in it, together." That night, she did not go to her room. She followed him to his. The tension that had been simmering for weeks was no longer anger. It was needed. A desperate, aching need to prove they were both still alive. In the dim light of his bedroom, she stood before him. The last time he had taken... This time, she gave, slowly, her hands trembling, not with fear, but with a deep, shuddering anticipation. She unbuttoned her shirt. She let it fall to the floor. She unhooked her bra and stepped out of her pants, standing before him in only her underwear, her body on display. The swell of her belly was undeniable now, a soft, perfect curve. Luca just watched, his breath caught in his chest. He looked like a man given a gift he was terrified to break. He reached out one hand, his fingers tracing the curve of her stomach, his touch light as a feather. "You are beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick. He knelt before her as if in worship. He pressed a kiss to the soft skin just above her navel. He laid his cheek against her belly, closing his eyes. "No one will ever hurt you again," he murmured, his words a vow spoken to the child within. "Not you, and not your mother, I swear on it in my life." He stood, lifted her into his arms, and carried her to the bed. The next day, the sun seemed brighter. There was a lightness in the estate. Sophia, the housekeeper, even smiled at Elena. Luca had left early for the city, but he had kissed her goodbye, a real kiss, and promised to be back before dark. Elena was in the garden, sketching in a notebook, when the sound ripped through the afternoon quiet. A black sedan, screaming down the country road, slowed just enough. The pop-pop-pop of a 9mm was drowned by the much heavier thwack-thwack-thwack of an automatic rifle. Bullets sparked and screamed off the high outer wall of the compound, chipping stone, shattering the illusion of safety. 2 guards grabbed Elena, shoving her back toward the house. "Inside! Now! Code red!" Alarms blared across the estate. Steel shutters slammed down over the windows. Elena was rushed through the kitchen and into the reinforced steel and concrete panic room in the basement. The door was sealed with a heavy, final thud. She was alone, in the dark. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The danger she had screamed about, the danger Luca had confessed he was running from, had found them. It had breached the walls. Hours later, the all-clear was given. Luca stormed into the panic room. His face was white, his eyes black with a terror she had never seen. He was not the controlled mafia boss. He was a man who had seen his worst nightmare come true. He did not speak. He just pulled her into his arms, crushing her against him, burying his face in her hair. She felt him shaking. He pulled back, his hands on her shoulders. "Are you hurt? The baby?" "We're fine," she whispered, her own body trembling. "We're safe." Luca looked at the steel door, at the opulence of his fortress, and his face hardened into something new, not just anger, fear. His past had finally, truly put a target on his future. He had built an empire of violence, and he had just led his enemies to the one thing he loved. The air inside the Ballant estate had curdled. What was once a sanctuary of silence and stone had transformed into a cage of paranoia. The shattered limestone on the outer wall, where the bullets had impacted, stood as a jagged reminder that the war was no longer a distant concept. It was at the doorstep. In the dim, smoke-filled air of the war room in the basement, Luca Ballant paced. He moved with the restless energy of a predator that sensed the trap closing but could not yet see the snare. Around the heavy mahogany table sat his capos, men who had served his father and now served him. But the atmosphere was wrong. The difference was thinner, the silence sharper. Rico sat at the far end, cleaning his fingernails with a small pocket knife. He was a wide, bull-necked man who had been Luca's enforcer for 10 years. He was loyal to the gun and the coin, and right now, he looked bored. "We are bleeding respect, boss," Rico said, not looking up. "The Bianchis hit the wall. They hit the wall of the Ballant estate, and we are sitting here in the dark. The streets are talking. They say Luca Ballanti has gone soft, that he is more concerned with a skirt and a cradle than the crown." Luca stopped pacing. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He turned slowly to face Rico. "Soft?" "Distracted," Rico corrected, finally meeting his eyes. "We have a leak. Someone told them where she was, and instead of tearing the city apart to find the rat, we are doubling guards on the pantry. We look weak, Luca, and in this city, weak men get buried." Marco, standing by the door, stepped forward. "Watch your mouth. Rico, I am speaking the truth." Rico slammed his hand on the table. "We should be hitting back. We should be burning the Bianchi warehouses to the ground. Instead, we are playing house." Luca walked over to the table. He placed his hands on the wood and leaned in, his face inches from Rico's. "We are not hitting back blindly because that is what they want. They want us to be reckless. They want us to expose ourselves. The leak came from inside. Only 5 people knew she was here. One of them is in this room." His gaze swept over the men. Some shifted uncomfortably. Rico held his stare, his jaw working. "If you think it is me," Rico spat, "then put a bullet in me. But if we don't strike tonight, we lose the east side." "We strike when I say we strike," Luca said, his voice low and final. "Dismissed. All of you." The men filed out, the tension thick enough to choke on. Rico was the last to leave, pausing at the door to give Luca a look that was hard to decipher, part disappointment, part challenge. When the door clicked shut, Luca exhaled, his shoulders slumping for a fraction of a second. He rubbed his face with his hands. The leak was real. The danger was escalating. And for the first time in his life, the violence he needed to summon felt heavy, a burden rather than a tool. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of failing her. He left the basement and ascended the stairs. shedding the mantle of the dawn with every step, trying to find the man he had been in the library. He found Elena in the sunroom. She was standing by the window, peering through the slats of the reinforced shutters. She looked pale, the stress of the attack etched into the dark circles under her eyes. She turned when he entered, and he saw the fear instantly trigger a defensive posture in her. "Is it true?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but her hands were trembling. "Is that true? That you're going to war?" Luca walked to the liquor cabinet and poured a glass of water, his hand shaking slightly. "They attacked my home. Elena, they attacked you. I cannot let that stand." "So you go out and kill them?" She crossed the room, her movements hampered by the heaviness of her pregnancy, but her spirit undimmed. "And then they kill 2 of yours? And then you kill 4 of theirs? When does it end? Luca, when will everyone die?" "It ends when they are gone," he said, turning to her. The harshness in his voice was defensive, a shield against her judgment. "I am doing this to protect you. To protect the child. Don't put this on the baby," she snapped. "You're doing this because it's the only language you know. I saw your face downstairs. Luca, I saw the way you looked at your men. You're becoming him again. The man in the alley. The man who breaks bones without blinking." "I have to be him," Luca roared, the controls snapping. "You think I can protect you by being gentle? You think I can keep you safe with poetry and soft words? This world is wolves, Elena. If I am not the biggest monster in the forest, they will eat us alive." The silence that followed was ringing. Elena stared at him, seeing the terror behind the rage. He wasn't angry at her. He was terrified of his own helplessness. "I don't want a monster," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "I just want the father of my child." She turned and walked out of the room. Luca watched her go, the glass in his hand threatening to shatter under his grip. He felt the walls of the estate closing in, trapping him between the man he was bred to be and the man she needed him to become. Hours later, the house was quiet. The night guards were on rotation, their footsteps heavy on the gravel outside. Luca entered the master bedroom. The lights were dim. Elena was sitting up in bed, propped against a mountain of pillows. She wasn't sleeping. She had a leather-bound notebook on her knees and a pen in her hand. She didn't look up when he entered, but she didn't tell him to leave either. He took off his jacket and gun holster, placing them on the chair, symbols of his violence left at the door. He sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. "What are you doing?" he asked softly. Elena hesitated, then turned the notebook toward him. The page was covered in elegant, looping script. Isabella, Sophia, Matteo, Gabriel. "Names," she said. "I realized we never talked about names." Luca looked at the list. Matteo. It had been his grandfather's name, a simple, strong name. He reached out and traced the ink with his thumb. The anger from the afternoon had evaporated, leaving only a deep, aching exhaustion. "I like Matteo," he said. "I like Gabriel," she countered softly. "It means the strength of God." "He will need strength," Luca murmured. He looked at her, really looked at her. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, her face scrubbed clean of makeup. She looked young, tired, and incredibly beautiful. He shifted, moving closer until he was sitting beside her against the headboard. The tension in her body slowly uncoiled as he settled. She closed the notebook and placed it on the nightstand. "I'm sorry," Luca said quietly. "About before. I am trying, Elena, but I don't know how to be what you want when the wolves are at the door." Elena turned her head to look at him. She reached out and placed her hand over his heart. It was beating steady and strong beneath his white shirt. "I know," she whispered. "I know you're trying. I'm just scared. I'm scared that if you go out there, you won't come back, or that the man who comes back won't be you." Luca covered her hand with his own, pressing it firmer against his chest. The warmth of her palm seemed to seep through his skin, thawing the ice that had encased his heart for 30 years. "This heart's yours now," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he could no longer suppress. He looked deep into her eyes, stripping away every defense he had left. That baby made it beat again. but you are the one who keeps the rhythm." Elena let out a soft breath, a sound halfway between a sob and a sigh. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Just promise me," she whispered. "Promise me you won't let the darkness win." "I promise," he vowed, kissing the top of her head. They lay there in the silence, two castaways on an island of their own making, while outside, the storm gathered strength. The next morning brought news that shattered the fragile peace. Luca was in the study, reviewing surveillance photos Marco had intercepted. They had a meeting. Not just the Bianchis, but mercenaries, heavy hitters from out of town. They were planning something massive, a coordinated strike designed to decapitate the Ballant family and burn the estate to the ground. "They are moving tonight," Marco said, his face grim. "They know we are holed up here." "They think we are cornered. Then we don't wait," Luca said, his voice cold and precise. "We hit them first, the warehouse on the docks. That is where they are staging. If we take out their command tonight, the mercenaries will scatter." "It's a trap, boss," Marco warned. "It has to be. It is only a trap if you step where they expect you to," Luca said. "Get the men ready. We leave at dusk." Luca turned to the table, mapping out the assault. He was focused, lethal, completely absorbed in the strategy of death. He did not hear the door creak open. Elena stood in the hallway. She'd come to bring him coffee, an olive branch after their night of peace. She heard the words assault, dusk, kill zone. The tray rattled in her hands. Luca spun around. When he saw her, his face fell. "Elena!" She walked into the room, setting the tray down with a clatter. "You're going—" "I have to," he said, stepping toward her. "They are coming for us tonight. If I don't stop them at the docks, they will be here by midnight. I will not have a firefight in the hallway where my child sleeps. Send your men," she pleaded, grabbing his arm. "Send Marco. Send Rico. Why does it have to be you?" "Because it is my name on the door," Luca shouted, the frustration boiling over. "Because my men will not follow a ghost. If I want this to end, I have to end it." "And if you die?" she cried, her voice cracking. "What then? Luca, I raise this baby alone. I tell him his father was a hero who loved pride more than he loved living. It is not pride. It is survival. It is suicide." She backed away from him, her hands on her stomach. "I would rather raise this child alone in a shack than watch you die for revenge. I would rather have nothing than to have a memory of you." She broke down, the tears coming fast and hot. She turned away, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief. Luca looked at her, and his resolve fractured. He crossed the room in 2 long strides and spun her around. He didn't speak. He just pulled her into him, his arms wrapping around her like iron bands. "I am not going to die," he said fiercely into her hair. "I am coming back. Do you hear me? I am coming back." She buried her face in his neck, sobbing. "You don't know that. You can't know that." "I know it," he said, pulling back to cup her face. His thumbs wiped away the tears. "Because I have a reason to live now. I never did before. I was a ghost. Elena. Until you." He kissed her. It was not gentle. I was not hesitant. It was a kiss of desperation, a claiming, a searing brand against the uncertainty of the night. He kissed her, as if he could breathe his life into her, as if he could anchor himself to the earth through her body. Elena responded with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer, trying to fuse them together. The fear of loss acted as an accelerant, burning away the last of their restraint. He lifted her onto the heavy oak desk, sweeping the maps and plans to the floor. The sound of paper tearing was lost in the sound of their breathing. "Luca!" she gasped, his name a prayer on her lips. He slowed down. He forced himself to slow down. He remembered her condition, the fragility of the life between them. His hands, usually instruments of violence, became revered explorers. He touched her with a tenderness that bordered on worship. They moved to the sofa in the corner of the study. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the room. They made love with a slow, aching intensity. Every touch was a memorization. Luca watched her face. Her eyes closed in ecstasy, her lips parted, and he engraved the image into his soul. He needed this. He needed to remember this when the gunpowder and blood filled the air later that night. Elena held him, feeling the weight of him, the solid, real warmth of his skin. She wrapped her legs around him, pulling him as deep as she could, trying to keep him there, trying to keep him safe within the circle of her arms. "I love you," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Luca froze. He looked down at her, his eyes wide, vulnerable. He had never heard those words directed at him, not in truth. He kissed her forehead, her eyes, her lips. "I love you," he choked out. "I love you, Elena." It was the final seal. The pact was made. An hour later, the sun had set. The estate was a hive of activity. Men were loading magazines, checking vests, moving with silent, deadly purpose. Luca stood by the back door, dressed in tactical black. He looked like the angel of death. Elena stood at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a shawl. She did not come down. She could not. If she touched him again, she would not let him go. He looked up at her. He touched 2 fingers to his lips and pressed them toward her. Then he turned and walked into the night. The convoy of black SUVs rolled out of the gates, disappearing into the darkness of the country road. Back in the war room, the silence was heavy, but it wasn't empty. Rico stood in the corner, near the secure phone line. He checked the hallway. Empty. He picked up the receiver and dialed a number he had memorized weeks ago. "Yeah," a rough voice answered on the other end. "It's done," Rico said, his voice low, devoid of emotion. "He's heading to the docks, took the main force. He thinks you're staging there." "Good," the voice replied. "And the girl?" "At the estate," Rico said. "Minimal guard, mostly the B team. The best men are with Luca." "We're moving on the estate now," the voice said. "Don't be there when we breach." "Just remember the deal," Rico said. "Steelgrave is mine when the dust settles." "You'll get your crown, Judas." The voice laughed. The line went dead. Rico hung up the phone. He looked at the map on the wall, where Luca had circled the backup safe house, a secluded cabin in the North Woods, the place he planned to take Elena if things went wrong tonight. Rico took a marker and crossed it out. Then he checked his watch. The Bianchis weren't at the docks. They were 5 miles down the road, waiting for the convoy to pass so they could encircle the estate. Luca was driving into an empty warehouse, while the wolves were coming to devour the lamb he had left behind. Rico adjusted his jacket, turned off the lights in the war room, and walked out into the shadows. The betrayal was complete. The convoy cut through the night, a silent procession of black steel moving toward the coast. Luca rode in the lead sedan, his mind a steel trap, running through schematics, entry points, and kill zones. He had left his best men, a team of 12, at the docks, ready to breach the warehouse on his signal. He himself, with Marco and 3 other men, was circling the perimeter. Watching from the darkness, he felt the old, cold focus settling over him. This was his world. This was the math he understood. Force against force, will against will. He thought of Elena's hand on his heart. This heart's yours now. He was not just ending a war. He was clearing a future. "All teams, status," he whispered into his radio. "Alpha, in position," came the first reply. "Bravo, in position." Luca looked through the night vision binoculars. The warehouse was dark. 2 guards smoking near a loading bay. Too quiet. Too simple. "It's a trap," he said, lowering the binoculars. "Boss?" Marco asked from the driver's seat. "It's too easy. They're pulling us in," he thought, his mind racing. "Or they're pulling us here." He remembered Elena's fear. What if you die? He remembered Rico's arrogance. We look weak. And then, the horrible, cold clarity descended upon him. The leak wasn't just about the estate. The leak was about tonight. They knew he was coming here. They let him come. His personal phone, the one secured for the estate's internal alarms, buzzed in his pocket. It was not a call. It was the silent, automated alert, the one that meant the perimeter had been breached, the one that meant the panic room had been activated. His blood turned to ice. "Back!" he roared at Marco, his voice cracking with a terror he had never known. "Back to the house, now! It was a feint, they're at the house!" He grabbed the radio. "All teams, abort mission, return to the estate. All teams, code red, they are at the estate." The 20-mile drive back was an agony beyond comprehension. Marco had the armored sedan flying, the engine screaming as it topped 130 miles per hour on the dark country roads. Luca sat in the passenger seat, his shotgun across his lap, his hands gripping the stock so hard his knuckles were white. He was staring, unblat, into the darkness, seeing only her face. "I am coming back, I promise." He had lied. He had left her. He had left her for this, for the empty warehouse, for the thrill of the hunt. And the wolves he had warned her about were at her door. At the estate, the betrayal had been swift and devastating. Elena had been in the nursery, holding the small wooden name Matteo that she had been trying to carve. The house was quiet, the B team of guards patrolling the grounds. Then, a radio squawk came from the guard in the hall. Rico's voice, sharp and urgent. "Fire on the east perimeter. Smells like gasoline. All units, east wall, move!" The guard in the hall, a young man named Paolo, cursed and ran for the stairs. "Ma'am, stay here. Lock the door." Elena's heart pounded. She heard the boots of the 6 remaining guards thundering across the gravel outside as they raced toward a non-existent threat. 3 seconds later, the front gates exploded. It was not a drive-by. It was an invasion. A heavy-duty truck, reinforced with a steel battering ram, smashed through the burning wreckage of the gates. Behind it, 2 black vans screeched to a halt and 20 men poured out. They were not Bianchi thugs. They were mercenaries, dressed in black tactical gear, armed with assault rifles. Paolo, halfway down the main staircase, saw them enter. He raised his weapon. "Code Red!" he screamed into his radio, but he was cut down in a hail of gunfire before he could finish. Elena heard the scream, the unmistakable sound of automatic weapons fire inside the house. She ran. Sophia, the housekeeper, burst from the master bedroom, her face white with terror. "The panic room," he said, "the panic room." Sophia grabbed Elena's arm, and they ran down the hallway. The house was erupting. They could hear the heavy boots on the marble floor below, the shattering of glass, the splintering of wood. A mercenary appeared at the top of the stairs, leveling his rifle. Sophia shoved Elena forward. "Go!" The bullets tore through the older woman. She fell in a heap at the entrance to the master suite. Elena screamed, stumbling, her hands slipping in Sophia's blood as she caught her balance. She didn't look back. She scrambled to the heavy steel-plated door concealed behind a tapestry, her fingers fumbling with the keypad. Code. What was the code? His birthday? 0812. The door hissed open. She fell inside, slamming her hand on the seal button. The heavy door slid shut with a final, sealing thud. She was in absolute darkness, safe and trapped, and then the pain. It was not fear. It was a sharp, searing hot blade twisting deep in her abdomen. It stole her breath, made her see stars. She cried out, collapsing to the cold steel floor, her hands flying to her stomach. The baby! She gasped, the pain cresting, holding her in its fist. It was too soon, weeks too soon. She tried to breathe, tried to remember the books Luca had left. Another contraction ripped through her, more intense than the first. The stress, the shock, the fall. She was in labor. Outside the door, she heard them, pounding, shouting, the metallic ping as they fired at the door, uselessly. Then, a heavier sound. They were trying to break the lock mechanism. Elena screamed, a sound of pure, animal terror, as another contraction seized her. Luca's sedan screeched around the final turn, his headlights illuminating a nightmare. His front gates were in ruins. The lawn was a battlefield. He saw his men, the B team. They had been ambushed on their way back from the fire, caught in a crossfire. They were all dead. "Marco, lock down the road. Kill anything that tries to leave," Luca snarled, his voice inhuman. He didn't wait for the car to stop. He rolled out, shotgun in hand, as the sedan slid to a halt on the gravel. He didn't see the mercenary on the roof. "Boss? Sniper?" Marco yelled. Luca didn't flinch. He raised the shotgun without aiming and fired, the blast echoing like a cannon. The man on the roof just disappeared. Luca stormed into his house. The grand foyer was a wreck. Paolo, his youngest guard, was dead on the stairs. The rage that filled Luca was not cold. It was black and boiling. It was a supernova of grief and fury. "Elena!" he roared. 2 mercenaries came out of the dining room, rifles raised. They were surprised to see him. They thought he was at the docks. He gave them no time to think. The shotgun boomed twice. 2 bodies hit the floor. He moved through his house, his sanctuary, his fortress. It was a slaughterhouse. He moved from room to room, a ghost of vengeance. He found another in the kitchen, trying to radio for backup. The blast sent him through the glass pantry door. He heard the noise, a heavy thud from the second floor, from his bedroom. He took the stairs 3 at a time. He saw Sophia's body in the hallway, and for a second, his heart stopped, thinking it was her. But it was Sophia. He stepped over her, his eyes on the tapestry, which was torn aside. 2 men were working on the panic room door. One was setting a small explosive charge. The other was trying to pry the panel off with a crowbar. "Get away from her door," Luca whispered. They spun, rifles coming up. They never had a chance. Luca was a demon, a blur of motion. The shotgun was empty, so he dropped it, drawing the heavy pistol from his hip. 2 shots, 2 perfect, brutal headshots. He kicked the explosive charge away. He looked at the keypad. It was smashed, useless. "Elena!" he screamed, slamming his fist on the steel door. "Elena, it's me! Open the door!" Silence. Then a moan. A high-pitched, terrible sound of agony. "Elena!" he roared. Panic seizing him, he grabbed the crowbar from the dead mercenary's hands. He wedged it into the seam, pulling with strength he didn't know he possessed. The mechanism was jammed. He fired his pistol into the lock mechanism, again and again until the clip was empty. He slammed his shoulder into the door. It didn't budge. "Stand back!" he screamed, hoping she could hear. He retrieved the shotgun and the shells from his pocket. He jammed the muzzle into the ruined lock, covering it with his hand, and fired. The recoil nearly broke his wrist, but the lock mechanism exploded inward. He kicked the door. It scraped open, heavy and slow. He stumbled into the pitch black. "Elena?" He fumbled for his phone, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. He found her on the floor, curled in a fetal position, in a pool of blood. The world stopped. The shooting, the betrayal, the war, it all evaporated. There was only this, the smell of copper, the sight of her pale, clammy skin. She was unconscious. "No," he whispered. It was not a plea. It was a denial. "No, no, you cannot leave me." He screamed her name, a raw, broken sound that echoed in the steel box. He dropped to his knees, his hands hovering, terrified to touch her. "Elena, wake up. Please, open your eyes." She didn't move. He ripped off his tactical jacket, wrapping it around her. He lifted her into his arms. She was terrifyingly light. He ran. He ran from the room, past the bodies of his men, through the wreckage of his home. He burst out the front door just as Marco's car screeched to a halt. "The clinic!" Luca screamed, his voice shredded. "Marco, drive! Get Alvini on the phone! Tell him now!" He laid her in the back of the sedan, climbing in with her, cradling her head in his lap. The car tore off, gravel flying. Luca ripped a strip of fabric from his shirt, pressing it against the bleeding, though he didn't know where the bleeding was coming from. It was everywhere. "Stay with me. Elena, please, amore. Stay with me. I'm here. I came back." "I'm here." He was sobbing. The words choked and broken. The private clinic was sterile and white, a stark contrast to the blood on his hands. "Doctor." Alvini and a team met them at the door. Elena was ripped from his arms and placed on a gurney. "Luca, what happened?" Alvini asked, his eyes wide as he saw the blood. "She's unconscious. She was in the panic room. She's God. She's bleeding." They rushed her into the trauma bay. A nurse pushed Luca back. "Sir, you have to wait. Save her," he roared, his face a mask of primal grief. "Save her, Alvini, or I will burn this city to the ground." The steel doors swung shut, leaving him alone in the white hallway. He stood there for a moment, his arms coated in her blood. He looked at his hands, the hands that had killed dozens, the hands that had held her. They were trembling, violently, uncontrollably. He slid down the wall, his legs giving out. He put his head in his hands, his body racked with silent sobs. He had failed. His promise was a lie. His empire was a tomb. He prayed, for the first time since he was a child. Luca Bellant prayed. He made bargains with a God he did not believe in. "Take me. Take it all." Just let her open her eyes. An hour passed. 2. The silence of the clinic was louder than the gunfire. The steel doors opened. Doctor. Alvini stood there. He had pulled his mask down. He looked shattered. Luca scrambled to his feet, his heart seizing. She's alive, Alvini said, his voice heavy. She's alive. But it was bad. Luca, a placental abruption. Likely from the shock and the fall. She lost a lot of blood. She's in a coma. We've stabilized her. But it's up to her now. Can I see her? Luca choked out. In a moment. There's something else. Alvini paused. We had to do an emergency C-section. We had to take the baby. Luca, it was the only way to save either of them. The baby. Luca had forgotten. Alvini managed a small, tired smile. You have a daughter. She's small. Barely 5 pounds. But she's breathing. She's a fighter. Luca, just like her mother. They led him into the room. It was dark, filled with the soft, rhythmic beeping of machines. Elena looked like a porcelain doll, small and white and still. An IV was in her arm, a tube under her nose. Luca pulled a chair to her bedside. He was so terrified to touch her. He just watched her breathe. A nurse came in, pushing a small, clear bassinet. Inside, wrapped in a pink blanket, was the tiniest human he had ever seen. He looked at his daughter, then he looked at his wife, lifeless on the bed. This was his fault. All of it. He reached for Elena's hand. It was cold. He held it to his lips. The iron grip he had kept on his soul his entire life finally, completely, shattered. He broke. He laid his head on the bed, his shoulders shaking, and he wept for the boy he was, for the monster he had become, and for the woman he had destroyed. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice broken. I'm so sorry, Elena. I never knew how to love. Not until you. Time in the clinic passed in a sterile, beeping rhythm. For 3 days, Luca Bellant did not leave the white, antiseptic-smelling room. He sat in the hard plastic chair, a ghost in his own life, watching the slow, steady rise and fall of Elena's chest. He had washed the blood from his hands, but he could still feel it, a phantom stain on his soul. He had held his daughter. The nurses, seeing the raw, unhinged grief in his eyes, had gently placed the 5-pound bundle in his arms, perhaps thinking it was the only thing that could anchor him. They were right. He studied her tiny, perfect face, her tuft of dark hair, her impossibly small fingers that gripped his pinky with surprising strength. This was his. This was the part of him that was innocent, the part that had not been touched by his father's darkness. And he had almost gotten her killed before she had even taken her first breath. On the 4th morning, he was standing by the window, rocking the bassinet with his foot, when he heard a sound, a faint, dry whisper. Luca? His heart stopped. He turned, his body rigid. Elena's eyes were open. They were cloudy, confused, and terrified. Her gaze darted around the room, taking in the IV pole, the heart monitor, her own hand, which was bruised from the needle. Where? She whispered, her throat raw. Luca was at her bedside in an instant. He didn't touch her, afraid he would break her. You're safe, he said, his voice thick. You're in the clinic. You've been asleep for 4 days. Her eyes widened as the memory came rushing back. The alarms, the bullets, Sophia, the panic room, the pain. The baby, she gasped, her hands flying to her stomach, which was now flat, empty, and aching. Oh, God, Luca, the baby! Shh, shh, he said, finally daring to touch her, his hand smoothing her hair back from her clammy forehead. Shh. Amore, it's okay, the baby is okay. It's gone, she sobbed, misunderstanding the terror of a mother's worst nightmare on her face. It's gone. No, Luca said, his own eyes filling. No, Elena, she's here. He turned from her and lifted his daughter from the bassinet. The baby, swaddled in a soft pink blanket, made a small, mewling sound. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the tiny bundle, her mind unable to connect the agony of the memory with the miracle in his arms. Luca moved slowly, his hands trembling. He sat on the edge of her bed, his gaze never leaving her face. He was broken, humbled, and terrified. He was no longer a king. He was a supplicant. She's so small, Elena whispered. tears of relief and confusion streaming down her face. "She's a fighter," Luca choked out. "The doctor said they had to take her, to save you." He gently, so gently, placed the baby in the crook of Elena's arm. The moment the baby's weight settled against her, Elena let out a sound. It was a sob, a sigh, and a greeting, all in one. She was here. She was real. Her daughter. She looked from the tiny, sleeping face up to Luca's. He was weeping. Not the silent, controlled tears of a man in pain, but the raw, broken sobs of a man who had lost everything and been given it back, damaged but whole. He didn't wipe his eyes. He let her see. He leaned down and pressed his forehead to her hand, which was resting on the baby's head. He didn't speak. He couldn't. "Luca," she whispered, her free hand finding his hair. He kissed her forehead, his lips brushing her skin, a silent apology, a vow, and a surrender. He was no longer the man who ruled Steelgrave. He was the man kneeling at her bedside. He stayed there until she and the baby drifted off to sleep, their heartbeats finally in sync. 2 weeks later, Elena was strong enough to leave. The clinic had been a bubble. The world outside was not. Marco, his face grim, had delivered the news. The Belanti estate was a war zone, uninhabitable. The warehouse assault had been a phantom. The Bianchis were scattered, their leadership in chaos after their failed, costly coup. But the betrayal was the real wound. Rico was gone. He had vanished, taking a significant sum of Belant money with him. "When you are better," Luca had said, his voice flat, "I will find him." Elena had seen the shadow in his eyes, the flicker of the old darkness. Now, she sat in a wheelchair as he pushed her toward the clinic's private exit. "Where are we going?" she asked, holding their daughter, whom they had named Isabella. "Bella. Somewhere safe," he said. It was not a new estate. It was a simple, modern apartment in the city, one he had kept off the books for emergencies. It was clean, filled with sunlight, and completely bare of his past. There were no armed guards, only Marco, who stood at the door, nodded, and left them. For a week, they lived a life of impossible normalcy. Luca learned to change a diaper. Elena learned to walk again without pain. They learned to sleep in 2-hour increments. Luca did not take calls. He did not check ledgers. He was a father. One night, Elena woke to the sound of Isabella fussing. She sat up, but Luca was already there, lifting the baby from the bassinet, his large, scarred hands looking impossibly gentle as he supported her tiny head. He walked her to the window, his back to Elena, and began to hum. It was a low, tuneless sound, a rumble of comfort. He thought she was asleep. "I can't do it anymore," he whispered to the sleeping city. "I can't be him." Elena's heart ached. "Then don't," she said softly. He turned, his face shadowed. He hadn't known she was awake. "I'm proposing a new life," he said, his voice gaining a sudden, desperate strength. He walked back to the bed, holding Isabella. "Not for me. For her. For you." He sat on the edge, a father with his child, not a boss with his queen. "I want to leave, to disappear. Steelgrave, the name, the business, burn it all. I have money, Elena. Enough, more than enough. We could go to the coast, to the mountains, anywhere. We could change our names. You could be a painter. I don't know. I could learn to build things instead of break them." He looked at her, his eyes stripped bare. "Just the 3 of us. No guns, no guards, no ghosts." Elena looked at the man who had been her savior, her captor, and her lover. He was offering her the one thing she had always wanted, but it wasn't just his to give. "Can you?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "Can you just walk away? Or will you always be looking over your shoulder? Will I wake up one day and find the man I married is gone, and the dawn is back?" "I don't know," he admitted, the honesty stinging the air. "But I am willing to spend the rest of my life trying not to be." "Then promise me," she said, sitting up, taking his hand. "Promise me, Luca. No half measures. No secret phone, no closure. It's all or nothing." "I promise," he said, his voice raw. "I need to see," she whispered. "I need to know it's real." The next day, he took her to a bank vault, not with a key, but with a code. Inside, There were no bars of gold. There were boxes. He opened one. It was filled with handguns. He opened another. It was filled with keys. Keys to safe houses, warehouses, offshore accounts. Another held ledgers and laptops, the brains of his entire operation. He looked at it all. The sum of his life's work, his inheritance, his prison. "Marco," he said, and his capo stepped forward. "Bring the barrels and the accelerant." In the back alley of the bank, in a rusted-out incinerator barrel, he began. He dumped the guns, the metal clattering. He threw in the laptops. He tore the pages from the ledgers, the names of his enemies and his allies turning to ash. And last, he threw in the keys. The sound of them, a high, metallic jingle, was the sound of his chains breaking. He lit the match. He stood with Elena, her hand in his, and they watched the orange flames consume his past. He was no longer Luca Bellante, the boss. He was just Luca. "It's done," he said. 2 days later, Marco came to the apartment. "He's been found," he said, his voice low, careful not to wake the sleeping baby. "Rico is at the penthouse in Miami, living like a king on your money." Elena's hand went to her stomach. She saw the muscle in Luca's jaw clench. "The old fire." "It's not revenge," Luca said, seeing her expression. "It's closure. I can't let him believe he won. I won't kill him. I promise you, I just need to close the door." Elena looked at him. She saw the man he was, and the man he was trying to become. "I'll go with you," she said. The luxury condo smelled of new leather and stale champagne. Rico was in a silk robe, his face pale and puffy. When he saw Luca at his door, he collapsed. "Please," he whimpered, falling to his knees. "Luca, please, they had my sister." Luca looked at the pathetic, trembling man. The rage he expected to feel was gone. He felt nothing, just pity and emptiness. Bella was in a carrier on Elena's chest, and she was watching. Luca reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out an envelope filled with cash. He dropped it on the floor in front of Rico. "This is the last you'll ever get from me," Luca said, his voice cold and final. "You did not win. You lost. You lost your honor. You lost your home, and you lost the right to call yourself a man." He leaned down. "Disappear. Go to Europe, to Asia. I don't care. And if I ever see you again, if I ever even hear your name in the wind, I won't be this kind." Rico stared at the money, then at Luca's face, and he saw a man he no longer recognized. He saw a man who had found something more powerful than vengeance. Luca turned his back on him, a gesture that in his old life would have been impossible. He put his arm around Elena and walked out the door, leaving Rico to his gold-plated prison. 6 months later, the air was warm and smelled of pine and damp earth. Their retreat was not a retreat, it was a home. A small, wooden house on a lake in the countryside, hundreds of miles from Steelgrave. Luca, now known as Mr. Leo, was learning to build. He had built a swing set. He was working on a small boat. Elena sat on the porch, sketching. She sketched the lake, the trees, and the man playing with their daughter under a large oak tree. Luca was on the grass, his sleeves rolled up, his arms strong and tanned. He was holding Isabella up to the sun, and she was laughing, her tiny hands grabbing at his dark hair. He was laughing, too, a real, deep, unburdened sound. Elena felt a peace so profound it almost hurt. She put her sketchbook down and walked across the grass, her bare feet cool on the earth. She came up behind him. He was so lost in the moment with his daughter that he didn't hear her. She wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, resting her cheek against his strong back. He stilled. He placed Bella gently on the blanket, and she immediately grabbed her toes, gurgling. "Turn around," Elena whispered. He did. Slowly, he turned in her arms to face her. The sun was in his eyes, but he wasn't squinting. His eyes were soft, the lines around them no longer from stress, but from smiling. "You never lied," she whispered, her hand coming up to cup his jaw, the rough stubble a familiar comfort. That man in the penthouse, the man in the alley, he was telling his truth. He just didn't know how to tell the whole truth until now. Luca closed his eyes, leaning into her palm. "You saved me." Elena. He breathed. You and her. You saved me from the only thing I was ever truly afraid of. What? She asked. Dying alone, he said. He kissed her. Not a kiss of desperation or of passion or of apology. It was a kiss of arrival. It was slow and deep and tasted of sunlight and forever. It was the beginning of something fragile, something real, and something finally free. Thank you so much for listening to the story of Luca and Elena. We hope their journey touched your heart. We would be so grateful if you would tell us where you are listening from in the comments below. Your support means the world to us. So please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories for more content like this. And do not forget to share your thoughts on the story. We love hearing from you.